Chapter 15. The Peak. Thervius did not know why he was alive, and he definitely could not account for why he felt so energized. For the last 3 days he had woken up warm to the bone, as if buried in piles of wool blankets. But no, he looked around, and there he lay on the cold bare rock, at what seemed to be the highest peak around. What was happening? A man, he said to himself, should freeze to death in a place such as this. Each night he lay under the flames of stars and said good night to his loved ones. Then with a sad but full heart he closed his eyes to die. But every morning he had woken to another vivid day, overlooking millions of peaks. By now he had memorized their contours and shapes. Looking at them is what he did all day long. He walked around on the smooth rock and snatched handfuls of snow to drink from the edge. The snow always swirled up in agitation, but Thervius would jump back and watch it die down as he sucked the water from his hands. He couldn't understand why he wasn't wearing down. In fact, he was gaining strength. All the aches and scratches from their journey thus far had been completely healed, including the vicious bite from the ice wolf. He studied his calf. It was as if the bite had never occurred. Every morning his body sang with an excitement to simply wake up in all this mysterious wonder. And each night he lay open to the night, prepared to die in the freezing cold. After sending love and goodbyes to Belderon, his parents, and his brother Janku, he would then slip somberly into dreams that were full of delight and shared beauty. They were like wonderful memories that hadn't happened yet, but they made Thervius' soul feel as if he was right in the company of all he loved. Thervius shook his head, realizing he was in the worst predicament of his life, and at the same time feeling he had never been better. He had never felt the miracle of his own life until now. He had never felt such vitality and well-being within his body. It didn't make sense. His heart thrilled at the unknown benevolence. This place had been hostile, and yet he could feel a strange support, like there was something here that wanted him to live. On this third day, there was so much energy in his body he couldn't keep still. His listless musing over the cold horizon was long over. He paced and then quickened to running in circles on the exposed rock. His lungs heaved with exhilaration. His whole body wanted nothing but to move. He raised his arms in the air and jumped up and down. Then from side to side, a beautiful pulsing current moved through him, and he began to move to its rhythm, stepping, jumping, dancing low to the rock, and then up to the sky. All the surrounding peaks witnessed the golden young man dancing upon the crown of Gren Amar. Thervius spun and let his eyes fall all around the distant horizon. With every full turn, his eyes caught a strange, black speck in the far sky. It was barely perceptible, too far away to tell which direction it was going, but he was too giddy to care. He moved around every inch of exposed stone. He pretended that every step was a kiss, and he patted the entire bare rock with his affection. He did not know how, but he was alive, and a gratitude surged through him that was the sum of all the joy and love he had ever felt. He was happy to be alive. In all his days, he had never been so happy about his life. And in that feeling, he recalled deeply the one with whom he wanted to share it. "Belderon," he yelled excitedly, "where are you?" Thervius decided that if he himself was alive, then certainly Belderon could be too. And if this much joy were possible in this cold place, then surely it was possible to be reunited with his beloved. Then Thervius made a swift jerk away from any thought that he had been abandoned. "He hasn't forgotten me," Thervius declared to himself. He would be here if he could. It was no use waiting. It was up to him to find Belderon himself. He had to trust. After all, if he could trust this strange, hostile place to keep him alive, Surely he could trust the greatest love he'd ever known. Thervius still couldn't stop moving. "I will find him," he yelled as he leapt up high, and with each leap he yelled louder, "I will find him! I will find him! I will find him!" He began running in a large arc around the edge of the rock. With every full circle, he saw the icy basin behind the two small trees and then descending, trickling creek. At last he stopped. "Water," he said. He stared intently downward. "Water. The water will take me." And in a flash he leapt off the rock, bounded through the already swirling snow, jumped over the basin and into the stream, running full force over rocks and laughing wildly at the howling snow behind him. In his peripheral vision he caught a wall of flying ice dust on both sides. He let the burning fire within him take him faster down the stream. His feet plunged into the icy melt. His great strides gave him the feeling of flight. The water sprayed around him as it began to deepen and widen down the slope. The agitated snow began to die down. He slowed his gallop to a swift walk, step after step, hour after hour, until the water was up to his knees. At last he stopped and looked around. The surrounding trees were now at least as tall as him, if not taller. The snow rested peacefully on all sides. He walked to the edge and put one foot on the pack and then another. The snow stayed still. He turned and began walking along the edge of the stream. He watched it as he walked, how it thickened and its voice deepened to a light roar. He climbed down the side of a small waterfall and began to notice small swirls of blue and green churning through the water. The evening sun began to throw long shadows across the flow, but Thervius kept walking. He wasn't tired. He was profoundly awake, and although his boots and pants were wet, he was warm to the bone. Chapter 16. The Farm. The mist was thick on the coast. Fog at the shoreline was common, but it rarely ventured up the bluffs and out to the plain, though to everyone in the field the cool air was welcome. 15 priestesses were in Janku's field. The other 5 had taken the parents up to the temple for mourning. The grieving couple would be fed and cared for, receiving the songs and prayers the priestesses said for the dead and their bereaved. At the edge of the land, where the trail began, Sophia was tending to a growing group of neighboring farmers who had begun to hear of the death of Janku and the devastation that had begun at the grove. As she told them the story, she intertwined lessons on forgiveness and anger. Despite the work to be done, she knew this was an important time to teach. She was careful with every word because she knew the story would be retold across the land and for generations to come. What she also knew deep in her heart was that the story was not yet over. The violence had slipped away before she could extinguish it. Down in the field, the priestesses were engaged in an ancient ritual that had always been turned to when needing to heal a wounded land. They were planting fava beans, eager seeds that would nourish the soil as they grew into plants, replenishing the earth with goodness and love. In the spring, the entire crop would be given to the ocean. The land would lay fallow for the summer and then receive another winter planting of fava beans. The plantings would be repeated 3 times so that in 3 years the land would once again be able to support life. Some of the priestesses sang as they worked. They sang songs of worship to the earth and the sea. They hoped the songs would be a salve to the soil. They hoped the songs would comfort the other priestesses, and they hoped the songs would ease the ache in all of their bruised hearts. Some clung to the wisdom that in time the memory of these dark days would fade. Their great sun would burn it away. Their prayers would have their way. They longed for that time to come, and a few secretly indulged in nostalgia for the time when none of this evil had been here. They worked steadily through the day, bent over, pushing the large, smooth beans into the ground. The earth seemed to regain its dignity with each scoop of dirt from their hands. Occasionally, one would go down to the stream and bring back jars of water for all. Occasionally, a pair would stop and hold each other through sudden memories of the demonic trauma. Sophia excused herself from the crowd and went to the creek to drink. She stepped down at the water's edge and dipped her cup into the stream. She drank deeply, noticing the profound purity of the water. She stopped and watched the dappled sunlight laze over the stones in soft current. The sweet light brought her into feelings of restored innocence. She sighed and turned to go back to the people. As she cast her eyes back up the bank, she saw someone standing at the edge of the trees. It was a large, sturdy man with short, cropped gray hair and a full silver beard. He was dark with dirt and responsibility. He gazed at her and turned to scan over the field, taking in the other priestesses. Sophia waited, expecting him to walk toward her, but he did not. He seemed hesitant. He had a massive presence, like he was a king, and yet he seemed unsure about what to do next. She cast her gaze down toward the bank, holding to her gown, as she strode up toward the man. At the top, she stood a few feet away from him. He was still silent. She saw his face was like sculpted granite and just as handsome, but the lines of his face were filled with perspiration and dust. She looked deeper and saw that he was tired and burdened. She breathed deeply and allowed herself to sense all of him at once. His memories flashed in colorful images around him, and she beheld that he indeed was a leader, and quickly she saw that he had encountered the demon. His mind was filled with flashes of Janku's horrible visage amidst grave destruction. She swallowed a profound sob as she realized the nightmare was not over. At last, she stood before him. They gazed at each other until he breathed deeply and spoke. "I am Marcus," he said. His voice was low. The priestess was flooded with sympathy for the man. His power was tempered with confusion and humility. In his defeat, he was graceful and honorable as a tree. She extended both her hands. "I am Sophia," she replied. He took her hands and bowed and then straightened, his eyes red with fatigue. "I have followed a trail of death here," he began. "My village is half destroyed because of a powerful evil unlike any we have ever seen. I come to know its nature and its remedy." Grief gripped the priestess and tears rolled down her cheeks. Indeed, the demon was intact and on the loose, and now an entire community of people had received its wrath. The priestess spoke as quickly as she could so as to spare this man waiting any longer for answers. The tender of this field was deeply angry at his brother. His anger caused an accident that killed him, and then the rage consumed his flesh. What is left is the demon you saw. He is now hunting for the living brother Thervius. Marcus let go of her hand, but his gaze remained on her. Now he realized why the demon had not completely destroyed them. It wasn't his people he wanted. He was looking for the young traveler from the southern coast. He was looking for Belderon's beloved. He spoke. "Thervius is on a journey with his companion Belderon to retrieve a blessing for the people in celebration of their union. They have been gone many months. We don't know if they are alive or dead, and all the village has received thus far is this curse." The priestess closed her eyes and breathed deeply to calm the surge of fear within her. She tried to feel for Thervius. It seemed he was alive but very far away. remote. It was like the faintest star in the sky, barely perceptible, but burning. Marcus watched. He had never seen anyone so elegant and regal, nor had he ever been in the presence of anyone who made him wait. His leadership meant that people sought him out for answers, but this woman did not lean on him for information. She sought something else. In fact, it seemed as though she already knew everything he could offer anyway, and much more. To meet her gaze, he had to stand as tall as he could, for they were the same height, and her posture was impeccable. She was strong, and her golden skin glowed in the muted sun. Her white robe, although imprinted with farm dirt, lost none of its grace, and it flowed around her body. The rest of the women in the field had stopped working. They watched the strange man and waited to see what would happen next. Marcus did not notice them. He was intent on Sophia and what she was about to say. At last she began. "I can help your people," she said. "It is possible to transmute the demon from their memory, but it will take some time. You will need to save what little hope they have left and ensure that none of the desperation runs unchecked. I will return with you along with 3 other priestesses. We will bring enough food to see your people through the winter. They must not work now, and we have plenty." Marcus was not easily thrown off balance, but this time he faltered. He had gone in search of a remedy, an action that would resolve the needs of his people. What he faced was an overwhelming gesture of generosity from complete strangers. He wasn't sure this is what his people needed. "We are hard-working people," Marcus said. "We can offer you hospitality, including food, and we can take care of ourselves." "Of course you can," said the priestess calmly, "but you have also asked for a remedy. Receiving our food and guidance is part of it. This is all for the healing of your people. If you do not follow every direction, we will fail." The priestess laid her deep green eyes into Marcus and did not look away. Now she continued, "You must rest and we must prepare for our journey." She turned and walked back, calling the other women in the field. She explained to them who the man was and why he was there. She told them about the upcoming journey and that she would announce who was going with her at dinner. All were to cease work in the field for the day and return to the temple to assist with the preparations. If they were not going with her to the village in the mountains, they would return to the planting tomorrow. The priestesses put down their tools. Sophia led them up the hill, followed by Marcus and then the long line of women in dusty white robes. Marcus looked around at the oak trees and their stout, gnarled architecture. He had never seen anything like them. They seemed as old as the earth itself. The trees of his land were tall and straight and could grow that way in a human's lifetime. He brought his eyes to rest on Sophia's long golden braid that moved in rhythm with her back. A dust-colored moth rested on the back of her shoulder. Her strides were long and graceful. She moved swiftly and seemed to leave a wake of clarity and assurance in her path. At last they came to a marble balustrade that outlined a large stone patio. They walked around it and were soon ascending the alabaster steps to the base of the temple. The chieftain stared in wonder. He had never seen so much brilliance. It lit up everything inside him. His eyes leapt to the marble columns, as wide as ancient cedars, with their incised images and beautiful writings painted in blue, red, green, and gold. They stood up high, sending their wisdom and beauty to the plains below. Marcus' eyes took in the green quilt of farms and the wide, misty blue sea. He had never seen the ocean. It filled him with sublimity and awe. Its vastness was intimidating, but deeply reassuring. Sophia turned and watched Marcus. Already the sun was cleaning him, drying up his unshed tears. He was stoic, but she admired his reasons for it. He was questing for hope. So many lives depended on it. If he couldn't feel any hope, the next best thing was not to indulge in the expression of its opposite, despair. He didn't know what to do, and so he would answer duty's call by staying attuned to her authority. She knew she had to be very clear and resolute with him. She respected him too much to muddle their discourse with vagueness or hesitation. The rest of the priestesses scattered to gather everything needed for the trip in the morning. Shortly, a woman brought out water, apricots, and fresh goat cheese with bread and olive oil. She set it on the ground between Sophia and Marcus, and after receiving Sophia's gratitude, turned back into the temple. Marcus gazed down at the food in wonder. "Let's eat," Sophia said. She arranged herself on the stone before the bounty. As Marcus sat down, she began to pray. "O beautiful Creator, Restorer, we surrender to you our bodies for healing. May your water slake our thirst. May this food nourish our bodies as well as our souls, so that we may arise to do your work. Unto you we give our thanks." Then she reached for an apricot and bit it in half. She picked out the pit and tossed it over the stone railing into the oaks and manzanita shrubs. She laughed. "I never thought I'd be dining with a mountain man. Your kind doesn't travel." "That is true," Marcus said. His face rolled into thought. "And I didn't want to leave. But now I know that it's good I've seen this beautiful place. I can tell my people about it. The ocean, the trees, the incredible sun." "Don't forget this," Sophia said. She held up the other half of the apricot, topped with a small mound of goat cheese. Marcus took the food and ate it. Instantly his breathing slowed and his eyes closed themselves. His stomach, having not received food for several days, growled into awareness of its deep hunger. Sophia watched his eyelids glisten in the sun and the muscles of his face relax. He forced his eyes back open and swallowed, nodded low to Sophia. "I understand," he said, "why your food is part of our remedy." Sophia smiled. "Not just the food," she said, "but also the giving of it. When your people can receive it gracefully, things will begin to change." They finished eating, and Marcus was shown to a small cabin behind the temple that was built into the base of the cliff. The mountain peak rose up just a short distance above. Aside from a priestess who came to inquire about the population of his village, he didn't see anyone else for the rest of the day. He watched the sun set in reds and oranges down the far end of the coast. Then he went right to bed and slept soundly against the relaxed heart of the mountain. Chapter 17. The Guide. The pink light of the dusk lit up the face of the sleeping Belderon. He still clutched the stone as he stirred and opened his eyes into a velvet silence. It allowed his heart and mind to come into alignment, to remember where he was and how the music and message had arrived. "It's a miracle," he whispered to himself. "This place has given me a miracle." He smiled broadly as he rubbed his face. He looked around at the rocks in gratitude. At last he had been able to hear the mountains. The place had offered him friendship and aid. He was to go up the river. Belderon scanned his memory. Since coming to the land, he had not yet seen a river, though they had crossed many streams, and Belderon knew that all streams eventually made their way to a river. Where was the last one he encountered? He looked at the nearest peak. The mountain man knew rivers ran in the wide cleft between mountains. The nearby mountain seemed too close. Besides, it was in the east, and that is the direction from which they had come. Perhaps a river could be found in the west, on the other side of this mountain, he thought. He would have to find out. And if anything, the likelihood was high that he would find a stream, which he could follow downhill. He stood up and stretched. Then he froze. All around him were tracks. Something animal, something large had circled him several times while he was sleeping. A chill ran through Belderon, but gave way to curiosity as he noticed the sparks of light coming from the tracks. They twinkled softly, emitting pink, purple, and blue. He kneeled down to get a closer look. It was pure light that danced around the contours. The daylight was fading, and the phosphorescent snow glowed more intently. The mountain man had never seen tracks like this. Not only did they glow, but their shape was strange. He imagined them to be of a bizarre long-toed bear or abnormally large lizard. He studied the circle around him until he noticed that the tracks departed in the direction of his walk 2 days ago. Belderon grabbed 2 furs from inside the cave, rolled them up, and tied them around his waist. He walked out to the glowing trail and began to follow its glittering lights in the deep blue night. Each track felt like a gift, and he studied all the colored sparks carefully before moving on to the next. These visions would be stories for Thervius. He walked hour after hour, amazed at the mystical tracks. At midnight he passed the snow orchids. The lighted tracks meandered around them and continued on. By deep morning, the mountain pass had narrowed to a cliffside trail that dropped off into complete darkness. Belderon kept his eyes down on the ever-glowing tracks, refusing to look into the abyss. Step after step, he willed his weight into the mountain. At last, as darkness began to loosen its grip on the night, Belderon began to hear the distant roar of water. When the sun had tipped over the ridge, the trail widened to a rocky promontory, and there the tracks ended. Belderon walked tentatively and peered over the edge of a massive cliff into the swirling blue and green torrent of the great river of Gren Amar. Belderon gasped and then whooped in delight. He didn't know it, but he was being watched, and his human cry of joy sent sparks off the blue dragon perched on the peak behind in the full light of the rising sun.